Hi, everyone. This session is to talk about the freedom to assemble, also known as the freedom to protest. Our objectives for this movie are to first be able to explain the role of protest as a means of self expression, especially within our democracy. We're going to see that the right of assembly and the right to petition are closely tied to one another as a means of grieving or complaining to the government, to society, to those who are in power. That this is a real important tool within our self government that we have to put pressure on the powers that be to change things. Also, I want you to be able to differentiate between what is peaceably assembling and illegally protesting, and we're going to talk about that a bit. And lastly, I want you to be able to explain the role of the government in facilitating and protecting the right of assembly, and that also get into some of the limitations that we have within this right. So let's talk about the right of assembly. You have the right to peacefully protest. Um, what is a protest? Well, a protest could be one person. A protest could be a dozen. Protests could be hundreds. Could be thousands. Could be millions. It's a way that we try to get public attention for an issue that we see, whether it's in governmental policy, as the notes say, or within a corporation, within our society, within a business, within a school, within anything in our society. It's a means of saying to the world, hey, check it out, there's something wrong. You all need to pay attention to this. So it's a way to get attention, but also it's meant to be disruptive. It's meant to put pressure on those in authority who have the ability to bring change, to make change. Protests are designed to make people feel uncomfortable, are designed to put people on edge, to try to push them to the point where they feel they have to act, that it will finally be in their own interest not to do that, to do something rather than to continue doing nothing. Your participation in a peaceful protest, even if it's against our government, can't be held against you by the government. However, there are limitations, and you can be punished by the law for acting outside those limitations. Speaking of that, what does that mean to peacefully assemble? Well, there's many different types of protests. I'm sure you've seen them, whether it's rallies, placards, whether it's a boycott. There's many different ways that you can protest. Usually, in order to have a large rally outdoors, you need to apply for permission. You need to get a permit. That permit can't be denied for you by the government simply because of what you stand for. But you also can't just show up and rally and protest whenever you want. So let's talk about peaceful protests. This image is from the 99% protesters from Occupy Wall Street a few years ago. They are laying in a park right outside of Wall Street, refusing to leave. As you can see, they don't seem very violent. In fact, they seem kind of peaceful. They're not actively doing anything violent or any sort of thing that's criminal, but they were ordered to leave public property that's owned by the government after refusing several times. They were forcibly removed. So my question for you is, these people, these protesters, if you are laying down the street, if you are protesting someplace in a non-violent fashion, are you still acting peacefully if you don't have permission to be there? Why do you think that these people were being arrested, and do you think that their arrest is constitutional? Make an argument for it. We're going to talk about this in class, and I definitely want to hear from both sides. Think on it, and pause the movie, write your answer, and come on back. Because really, we have to look at a lot of the limitations that the right of assembly has. Of all of our free expression rights, um, when we look, the right to assemble definitely has the most limitations on it. The government has the right to require permits for assembly. You can't go and um, violate private property rights. You have to respect the rights of ownership. If you're upset at me, you can't go and protest on my front lawn. If you're upset at the school, you can't uh, chain yourself to the doors of the school. Even though you could argue this isn't a violent form of protest, I'm peacefully protesting, still not within your rights. And if the government feels that there is a cause for safety concern, they can deny permits for safety reasons, not for political reasons. In fact, the government's given assembly rights to many groups that are against our government, that stand for hideous, racist, um, prejudicial, ignorant causes, but they have a right to be able to assemble and demonstrate and speak out on what they believe. Now, of course, you're not protected for a violent protest. Um, let's say a riot is a form of protest, but it's not a legal one. Attacking somebody that you're politically angry at, you might be using as a form of protest, but is not a peaceful form of protest nor a legal one. So a violent or criminal act, just like in free expression, is not protected. Now, of course, there are limitations on that, and what you can define as making a right of expression a criminal act, as such as flag burning, that's definitely debatable. But as far as you must stay within the basic guidelines of the law within your forms of protest. Now, let's take a look at an example. And we're going to look at recent history from 1965 here in the United States to see an example of when rights of assembly were denied by the state and local governments, and then how the federal government, within its rights of the Constitution, its role within the Constitution, stepped in to make sure that these rights were protected. Remember, we have a government, and its number one job is to protect our rights. So, in this thought, let's think on what would it look like if the freedom of assembly was not protected in the United States, by seeing times that it wasn't protected in the United States, even despite the Bill of Rights. In March of 1965, up to 600 marchers participated in a march from Selma, Alabama, to go along a 54-mile stretch to Montgomery, Alabama, the state capital. These marchers were civil rights marchers, peacefully marching for voting rights, for protection for their constitutional right to vote, in defiance of segregation laws and segregationist activities. They announced their march. It wasn't a secret march. It wasn't a surprise. Yet on the day of the march, local police deputized a number of regular everyday citizens and had them meet these marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which is right on the outside of Selma. On this event on March 7th, which is known as Bloody Sunday, these 600 peaceful marchers who were announcing that they were in nonviolent resistance were attacked by the police. They were beaten with nightsticks. They were hit with tear gas. People were attacked by dogs. People were sprayed with fire hoses at a strength that could rip your skin off, that could knock you to the ground, knock you unconscious. People were beaten unconscious. People had to be hospitalized. Um, the images of this were on the national news. The images of this infuriated the country. The president at the time, Lyndon Johnson, ordered the governor of Alabama, a man by the name of George Wallace, to protect the marchers the next time they marched, that they had a right to march. The governor of Alabama refused. The local governments in Alabama, the police were the ones who were attacking them. They refused to protect these rights of these marchers to peacefully protest. So, in turn, Johnson and the Justice Department sent U.S. Marshals to protect the marchers, to make sure that they were able to have their right to complete their march. When this march was finished, led by Dr. Martin Luther King, over 25,000 people joined in on this 54-mile march for civil rights. In many ways, it was a catalyst to bring about the Voting Rights Act and push forward many laws that really revolutionized civil rights on a federal level. So the government stepped in, the federal government stepped in when the state and local government was attacking people's rights of protest, was restricting their First Amendment rights. It was U.S. Marshals, it was the U.S. National Guard, it was U.S. soldiers who were sent in to protect their rights. So, that wraps up the freedom of assembly. Our next movie will be on the freedom of petition. You may stop the movie now. Thank you.